Morning, the team at The Exchange meets to talk over the top stories of the day. Here's a look behind closed doors at what we think makes the cut.
Gender gap report that shows Canada isn't doing terribly, but we are making a little bit of progress.
YouTube is considering and letting people watch their stuff without ads if they pay for it.
Twitter's user base is growing, but it might not be growing fast enough.
It's a parliamentary budget report that we've dramatically underestimated the cost of building issues.
The yearly gender gap report from the World Economic Forum is out. It shows modest improvements in narrowing the gap between men and women. Canada ranked 19th overall. That's one spot up from last year. Men and women are mostly equal when it comes to health and education around the world, but there's still a wide gender gap in the workplace and in politics. The report says the world will eliminate the gender gap eventually, but the way we're going at this rate, it'll be 2095, 81 years away. Here's part of the discussion these numbers sparked in our story meeting.
Some of the numbers were some of the ways that they ranked I found fascinating. In that countries you would never put in one of the best places in the world to live have some of the highest female representation in Parliament.
Right.
Whereas Canada has to be one of the best countries for a woman to live in, and yet representation in Parliament is about 20%.
India would be one example, right?
Exactly.
Where it can be very difficult for some members of society to be a
Parts
woman.
of Eastern Europe.
So I guess that's the question is, do you want a more stratified society where it's wonderful to be a woman at a certain level and terrible at another, or do you want a more equal one where it's sort of middling all around?
Twitter's latest earnings had investors, Twitter, sent the stock down 10% today. Sales more than doubled to $360 million in the latest quarter. The company remains unprofitable, posting a loss of $175 million. Twitter is struggling to recruit new users. 284 million people logged onto the service, but that is just a quarter of Facebook's membership. A Forrester analyst suggested the lack of growth comes from Twitter's relative lack of innovation. The experience on Twitter today is the same experience people have always had on Twitter. One online giant that is thinking about changing the user experience is YouTube. Reportedly, YouTube is working on a paid ad-free model. That's a big shift from its current ad-only approach. It could put it in competition with online video services like Netflix or Hulu, as well as music services like iTunes. The key issue is, how much will it cost?
Would you pay for YouTube service?
How much are they asking you to pay to avoid the ads?
Well, they're just floating the idea. I don't think they've set a price.
So that would be the key. You would probably pay $5 a year.
They'll figure out what that is, right? So it's just the natural progression.
If I can spend my $5 a month, $10 a month, I will no longer need iTunes. I will no longer need Pandora, not that you get it here, or Shazam or Songs, or any of these things that people are being asked to pay. And if it's comparably priced.
The industry seems to be moving to the sort of buffet style with Spotify and other services where you pay your flat fee and you get access to all the music. If that's where they're going, this is just another version.
A new report from the Parliamentary Budget Officer suggests that Ottawa's budget for buying Arctic patrol ships is insufficient. That caught our attention this morning.
I feel like when these contracts were announced, this was sort of warned, that they were underestimating both the initial cost and the lifetime service costs.
And yet it's the government's job to estimate this stuff and plan for what it's going to cost us.
The government planned to buy 6 to 8 Arctic patrol ships on a budget of $3.1 billion. The PBO says that's only enough to pay for 4 ships and 1 fewer if there are any delays. The issue sets up a spat between Ottawa and the PBO. Public Works claims the PBO report was derived using inaccurate specifications. Meanwhile, the PBO says the government refused to give them all the information that it needed. The CBC's Evan Solomon is here with the political X factor of this one. Evan, on the one hand, we've become a little accustomed to these contracts being kind of, the budgeting is slightly off. They're big contracts. You're going to forgive people for getting it wrong here and there. With this kind of tit for tat, though, between the PBO and Public Works, what do you make of what we should believe here?
Well, there's 2 things. First of all, a spat between the PBO and the government over costs. Yeah, right. We see that all the time. They don't trust the PBO's numbers. The PBO has always said that they don't get enough transparency from the government. They've even taken the government to court over numbers. Remember when Kevin Page, when he was the PBO, took the government to court over the cuts. But this one is a bigger deal because the government keeps touting that it's going to have this big national shipbuilding strategy. They announced it 2011, Amanda. They've still not delivered a single ship.
Right.
And now, as we see again, they probably won't be able to deliver what they'd promised in the first place.
One thing that doesn't seem sort of very clear to me is why the government was given an estimate that their numbers were wrong and 2 days later signed the contract anyway. In other words, there was a sense that there was some budgeting that was slightly off. When we get to numbers of this size, maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe the idea is just to get the thing underway and get the contract going. I don't know. I look at it and say that's sort of bad accountability.
Well, first of all, the numbers matter because they're big numbers. But, you know, there's kind of a saying in Ottawa, how do you spell procurement? And it's trouble. You spell it trouble. Whether you're talking about planes, think F-35, whether you're talking about the National Shipbuilding Strategy, this is a big deal. Remember, it was 2011 that they chose those shipyards. We're going to build lots of ships. We're going to create a lot of jobs. We're going to kickstart industry. We're not going to ship this offshore because we want to create jobs. But their estimates have clearly not been accurate, although the government disputes it. The PBO says so. They're not delivering ships. And remember, there's a dollar loss cost value.
Sure. But let's talk about why this matters. We've seen other big contracts. Is on the X factor side here, politically, does it matter that, you know, planes are being run out over budget or maybe will never be delivered? We've seen other big contracts that just don't seem to be run the way you might run, say, a well-run business. Do people need to? Do people care about it? I guess is what I'm wondering.
Well,
politically.
first of all, big government procurement is big money. Big money is jobs. Do you think they care about this in Halifax at the Irving shipyards? Those are big jobs.
Sure.
Do you think at the Davie shipyard in Quebec? Big jobs. In Vancouver, where they're building ships. These are big jobs, and they've got huge spin-off industries. This is what the government's bragging about. They've even been challenged. Will this cost more for Canadians than if you just outsource this stuff? They say it might, but the whole purpose is to actually create jobs and industries here in Canada. So yeah, it matters on the money. It matters politically for the jobs, for the region. Gosh, remember what happened when Brian Mulroney changed a company from Manitoba, right, to Quebec. These are big political deals. So the political X factor on this is, even though there's decision phobia inside the government procurement after the fiasco that's been the F-35, Amanda, they got to make some decisions. They got to spend some money, or what became big political promises turned to be big political busts, and that cost votes.
I guess the only other part of this that I'm curious about is the aspect of Arctic sovereignty. That's been a big push by this government. They care a lot about it. Where do these ships fit into that? And is it sort of relevant that, you know, we have ships that can be, you know, they're not quite icebreakers, icebreaker light, whatever they wind up being. Right. Is that important?
Well, first of all, it's kind of like when you promise someone something and deliver them something else. These were supposed to be heavily armed, very heavy-duty icebreakers. Now they're only going to cut through one-year ice. There'll be lighter armaments. In other words, all the features have gone down. It's not all the bells and whistles they asked for. It's a couple bells and maybe one whistle. That's the first thing. There's not the number of ships there'll be. And that plays into what this government has done and made Arctic sovereignty a very, very big deal. And the questions will be asked. Are you investing enough, quick enough to patrol the Arctic and keep it safe? And this is all about what Stephen Harper likes to talk about, the Northwest Passage. He found the Franklin ship. That's an old ship underwater. He's got to focus on new ships above water.